This is a continuation from last week, attempting to better understand one's spouse, and I should really add one's friend, one's child. Eventually we will be talking about parent and children relationship between friends, neighbors, partners, etc. And the rules that we learned last week, and we will continue with them today, apply across the board. There's of course some differences between differences in age, like between a parent and a child, but more or less the rules are the same. The knowledge of this information, the astrological information which we began with last week, even though it's quite esoteric, nevertheless it does help, and I guarantee it will help us better understand the needs of every human being, what their needs are, what do they desire, what do they aspire, what do they want from us. And not only will we know what those needs are, we will come hopefully to better appreciate the strengths that each individual is endowed with. Each one has something to contribute, and we will be able to perhaps also to recognize the weaknesses that all human beings have. And if we recognize them, then hopefully it will allow us to better deal with them, to tolerate them. If we don't have an understanding of those differences, then it's much more difficult to cope with. Once we review what these differences are, what these weaknesses are, and we can identify them, when you see them in an individual, you won't be surprised. You won't wonder, why did they act in a certain way? You will say, oh, I remember that. That is very typical of him or her. Therefore, I better learn how to deal with it. Another perhaps benefit that we didn't mention last week is when one knows what his strengths and weaknesses are and what his inclinations and tendencies are, it may help him choose a career. Many people go through high school or even early on in college not knowing what they're going to end up doing. But it's human nature to lean in a certain direction, to have certain tendencies. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, draws him or her to where they need to be. But at first we don't know, and we are confused, and we'd like to have a better sense of direction. And many people end up going to, what do they call them, vocational counselors, to help them. And vocational counselors are good. They probably do a psychological analysis. And this, in some ways, is even more extensive. It will show that we have many capabilities, and not one job necessarily will be befitting for us. There might be more than one area that we can be good at, that we can excel in. So this knowledge can help us in many ways. What I first want to do, I promised you last week that we were going to go through every single month. I still intend to do that. But before we do that, I put together some transparencies, important transparencies that have information about the elements that we discussed last week. What I plan to do now is show you the strengths and weaknesses in every element. And after that, the more interesting part will be which elements combine with which elements. If you are air and air, earth and earth, earth and water, earth and fire, what should you expect to go wrong? And what should you expect, hopefully, to go right? This is something that is incredibly accurate. But even though it's accurate, some of you might say, as you said last week, this does not apply to me. Well, let me tell you right now, there are lions out there, Leos, who do not roar. Okay? Even though a lion is supposed to roar, and he's supposed to be very loud, there are lions or Leos that do not roar. And I'll explain that too. So don't expect to see yourself entirely in a particular element. Remember, the most important thing is the dominant element, the dominant yesod. So let's begin with the first transparency. Let's maybe sharpen that up a little bit. You will see the attributes of fire and the attributes of air, those two groups. And the way it's divided up on the transparency is between skillful application and unskillful application. Skillful application means that if they channel their strength, their energies properly and positively, they have certain kohot, certain strengths, and they can succeed as a result of these skills if they apply themselves correctly. The unskillful are the ones they have to work on. These are pretty much for all the fire element, but as we will see later on, there are differences between each one of the months. So even though Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius are all fire, there are several differences between them. I'm going to briefly go through them. I'm just leaving it up here so that you can follow easily. Skillful applications, they're very radiant, glowing, warm, flaming, energetic, creative, fervent, aspiring, spontaneous, passionate, and daring. All these are very good qualities. Not every one of the 12 months, not the other elements are not necessarily daring, they're not necessarily fervent, they're not necessarily aspiring. These are qualities that can come in very handy, right? And that some people who lack them would love to have them. But these individuals, or those who have a tremendous amount of fire in, are endowed naturally. It just comes naturally to them. They can be very spontaneous. You know, they don't think about something 2, 3, 4 days in advance. They can just think of something spontaneously. They have tremendous energy. And going down to the second paragraph, they are also very assertive. They'll tell you what they want, and they won't be tactful about it. They're courageous, they're confident, they're independent. And that's good. Not everybody's independent. Some people rely on others to initiate. No, they initiate. They're very independent. They're very active. They have enthusiasm. They're demonstrative. Demonstrative is important when it comes to feelings, emotions. They know how to demonstrate it. And they're usually inspirational, optimistic, and so forth. I guess you can follow at your own pace what they are. These are approximately the characteristics that you will find in those individuals who have an abundance of fire. However, with all these good qualities come some negative qualities as well. As a result, and it's all automatic, as a result of being passionate and daring and flaming and warm and aspiring, there is some negative fallout too. So they can be hot-headed, they can be rash, they can be impulsive, impatient, impetuous, uncontrollable, and burns out. Burns out means that there are some individuals out there that begin a project, and after a couple of days they just leave it. So they began with a tremendous amount of willpower and fire and enthusiasm, but it dies down. So, is that good? No. What good is if it is no continuity? They can be aggressive and very pushy people. Anybody here know anybody pushy? They probably have a tremendous amount of fire in them. Violent, domineering. There's a lot of people who are domineering, or they'd like to be. Obnoxious, I mean, that sounds very familiar. Insensitive, oh, I know a lot of people like that. Fanatical, unrealistic, chasing false hopes, because they have a tremendous amount of energy. So you have to understand where they're coming from. I wouldn't call them bad, they're just unskillful. In other words, it can slow someone down, it can send them in all sorts of directions, the wrong direction. So there's a lot of good, and there's a lot that one has to work on. And that's the side called unskillful. Let's go quickly to air. We have Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius that share some of these characteristics. They're air, so it's a much more mental and intellectual element. If you've ever heard the description of an absent-minded professor, that's a typical Aquarian. Abstract, logical, rational, theoretical. Doesn't mean that all Aquarians do not know what's going on, and some of them are actually walking down the street and don't realize that there is a tree in front of them. They're so engrossed in their thoughts. They're much more mental. They think about things, they're theoretical. A lot of scientists are Aquarians. They're inventors. They're always thinking. And the air also endows one with communicative abilities. It makes them social and friendly, as I explained last week. Inquisitive, curious. They can be impersonal, especially Libras. Impartial, dispassionate, unbiased, and fair. Tolerant. And they can be, the last one is clever, witty, and versatile. Versatile means they have a certain amount of flexibility. All of this is good, but unfortunately there are some weaknesses too. They can be spacey. It's too much of a good thing. Over-intellectual. They can be wordy, verbose, nosy. I know some people like that too. And gossiping, uncaring, detached, aloof. Aloof is a problem with air too. When we speak about the midot, Perhaps when we get a little bit more involved in the actual breakdown of each month, we'll be talking about the strengths and weakness of each one, what each one has to work on. So imagine somebody that has an abundance of air. His midah or his challenge may be ga'ava. He might be aloof. He might think highly of himself because he's so smart. So he looks down at others. That may be one of his challenges. Distant, removed, because he's so smart, because he's so absent-minded, he may not even pay attention to what's going on. And people may misinterpret that. They may say, oh, he's so cold and detached. Not necessarily, he's just so much into himself, he didn't even see you, even though you were 2 feet away. Some people take that as, oh, he doesn't care, he's not looking at me, and they're offended. Remember, if he's air, he didn't mean it necessarily. It all depends, So it pays to be careful before we judge someone. Find out first of all what his element is, or what his sun sign is. They can be indecisive, and we'll talk about that when we talk about Libra. And superficial. Superficial means that when they study something, they may not necessarily study it in depth. Typical of this is Gemini. They'll just leaf through all the pages and not necessarily read word by word in the book. Let's go on to the next transparency. There we have the earth and water. Earth, we have Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. The earth qualities that are good, that are admirable, is that they're down to earth, they're practical, they're realistic, they're dependable, completely reliable, trustworthy. Not every one of them. It doesn't mean that everyone who has earth you can rely on. I mean, you still have to check him out. But, this is not a guarantee. Don't, after the lecture, go and give your money to somebody just because he has a tremendous amount of earth. Chances are that he'll remember that you gave him the money and he'll give you back the money. Chances are much better, by the way, with the earth than with any of the other 3 elements. That's why it says there, reliable, dependable. But it's not a guarantee, because people have Yetzarim, they have instincts, and if they don't have Torah as an anchor, and there's no documentation and there's no witnesses, maybe they will be tempted. Nevertheless, these are characteristic, they're very typical of the earthy signs. They're trustworthy, deliberate, and cautious. They're not spontaneous. They think about things. They're solid. They're structured, and they can be sensuous, the earthy elements. They're more patient, persevering, which is helpful, persistent, industrious, and productive. The last 2, industrious and productive, means that they're very hard workers, which is good. All of this is good. On the other hand, the unskillful application, they can be too much of a good thing. They can be overly conservative, unenterprising, afraid to take risks. Because they're so conservative, because they're so cautious, they may not take risks. I guarantee you there's very few Capricorns investing in the stock exchange, especially in the junk bonds. Why? Why put your money in a place where it's a guaranteed loss? That's the way they'll think about it. But they're earthy. They'll invest in something that's secure, real estate. So who's investing in the stock exchange? Probably Sagittarius, Aries, and Leos. Most of them. They take risks, and they don't mind losing. They're not afraid. Well, the earth people are afraid. They want to be more secure. But the problem is sometimes they'll be over-conservative, and they won't take any risks, and they won't get anywhere as a result. They can be very stubborn, unyielding. Unyielding means that they want their way. It's different than stubbornness. Possessive, they can be very narrow-minded. Narrow-minded, that is like somebody who has a dogma. He only thinks of his philosophy. It's hard for him to accept what other people's philosophy is. They're very narrow in what they see. Obstinate, intransigent, inflexible, unchangeable, very difficult time changing. They don't like changes. They've settled down. This is what they're doing, 9 to 5. This is where they're located. They'd rather not move if they didn't have to. That's the type. Let's go on to water, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces down there. They are the more, let's call them sensitive and sentimental and emotional. And as a result of all that feeling that they have, they're very nurturing. They make the best nurses. very providing, protecting, shielding, retiring, feeling emotional, sensitive. It doesn't mean that all the other ones don't have that, but this is very, very strong in those who have a tremendous amount of water. To them, this is more important, that they have the feelings and that they have emotions than that the Leo is enterprising or that the Virgo is industrious. They are very caring people. And they're adaptive, yielding, receptive. They can be psychic because they have intuition. The water signs are the ones that have usually the most intuition. And they go by hunch instead of by logic. This is the way they feel. They just feel it. And they go by their feeling instead of by logic. The unskillful applications is that they can be overprotective. Imagine a mother, I just heard one, who has a single daughter, and she's overprotective of her. She doesn't just want to let her just get married. And the daughter is becoming older and older. She doesn't want to let go of her daughter. Overprotective, smothering, clinging, over-emotional, fearful, insecurities, shy, weak, powerless, dependent as opposed to independent. And they can be deceptive, secretive, and untruthful. They can be. Not necessarily, depends, because as we will soon see, there are the good ones and there are the bad ones, and there are a lot of people in between. So you may come across most of the time nice people who are nurturing and giving and kind, and not necessarily too many of the unskillful applications, but they do exist. They are the weaknesses of the water elements. All right, now let's go quickly to the combinations. This is very fascinating. Now that you have some sort of an idea of what these elements are, who goes with what? I'm just going to go through it quickly. Elements that are the same are usually okay. They get along with each other, but much more as friends. As marriage partners, not necessarily, because in a marriage partnership, you usually want something that is stimulating and that complements you and that can give you what you are lacking. But it can work just fine, because as I said last week, we're all combinations. We all have several elements. But if it were to be a pure fire situation, there could be a lot of energy, there could be a lot of things done at home, but as you can see, too much fire will produce competition, conflict, and burnout. Imagine if the two are very strong. Each one wants to lead. That's going to be a problem. One has to be subordinate. So it can be a problem, but usually it's okay. Fire and earth, there can be some inspiration, but usually the earth is so conservative that the fire can't get along with him. The fire loves adventure. He loves the outdoor life. He just wants to have fun and travel all over the world. And the earth says, just leave me alone. I want to read a book. I want quiet. So usually there's a tremendous amount of conflict of interests and ideas between the fire and earth. Fire and air usually is good. Air's ideas feed the flame's fire's creativity. Air also knows how to flatter the fire. So the fire likes it. Oh, there's finally somebody that is giving me the kavod and the honor that I deserve, he's thinking. And the air, because the air does that naturally. It looks up to the fire. But sometimes there may be too much theory and not enough application. In other words, there can be some problems, but usually it's okay. Fire and water. As I said last week, it's a Churban Bet HaMikdash. Fire and water is usually no good, but there are people out there who are married, fire and water. And the reason for that is because each one of the two has what the other one has. It's a combination of fire and water. It's not that one is pure fire and pure water, because that's a guaranteed divorce. They would never get together to begin with. They would be miles apart. They would never be attracted. If they were attracted, they got married. There must be some similarities. There must be some chemistry. But no matter how much chemistry there is, there will be major differences, because one is fire and one is water. Water is sensitive, and fire is intense. So they may be able to help each other, but usually, because of the water's needs for closeness and bonding, and that's all the water wants, the fire wants to become completely independent. will not get along easily with the water. The fire does not have what the water needs. And the fire may say to the water, I really care for you. What can I do for you to make you happier? There's nothing he can do. Because the fire simply does not have what the water wants. So no matter how hard he tries, and it's very nice of him to try, and he should try if they're already married. One needs to do his best to make the other one, happy. But what did we say last week? You can only bring into a marriage what you have. You cannot be somebody else. This is what you are. One can work on his midot, one can work on his nature, on those unskillful applications, so there should be less friction. That, yes. Try to work on eliminating friction, but to give what you don't have, that's impossible. But they can still get along if they work, but they have to work very hard. Earth and earth is fine, but it could also be too much conservatism. It could become very boring. So if the two have something else other than earth, it usually goes fine. Earth and air can be somewhat okay, but usually earth likes to be consistent. Remember, earth does not like change, and air likes change. So that can be a problem. It's usually not a big problem if one is somewhat adaptable and can take those small changes. It's not a big disaster, earth and air. Earth and water is great because, as you can see, earth provides structure to stabilizing the water's emotions. The water can nurture the earth. Water just has what earth needs. And the earth has what the water needs. But you can see that it could also be unskillful. It could be stuck in the mud. But usually earth and water works splendidly. It's a beautiful relationship. It's very successful. As long as their character, of course, their midot are fine. Air and air is great for communication. They make excellent friends. And if in the marriage, if that's all they want to do a whole day is talk, then it's okay. They're okay. But in marriage is usually more than just communication. So it all depends what you're looking for. If you're happy with just talking and going out and reading together, some people are just happy with that, then it's fine. But it could be overly intellectual. If one of them is a little bit of water and he has air, he or she may be looking for something more than just communication. Air and water also. There's a lot of intellect on the air, and the water wants bonding, wants emotions, and wants feelings. So the logic conflicts with the feelings. The air is also detached. The water needs to be connected. Water and water are okay. They usually do well as friends and as marriage partners too. They can each one can actually support the other one. But sometimes there's a lack of stimulation, especially if one of the two of them is over emotional and the other one does not know what to do with him, because they're both water. So there's no earth here. If one is too emotional, hypersensitive, too dependent, then the other one may not be able to help him or her. But usually it works fine. This is just an idea of how the elements go along with each other. All these elements will change slightly depending on positions of the stars. And I'm not going to give a whole course of astrology. I'm just going to briefly go over some of the areas that can change. Just because somebody is earth, just because somebody is fire, water, or air, it does not mean that he will have all of those qualities. The sun, the position of the sun, for example, in astrology, determines one's identity and purpose in life. So one may be of a particular element and have a clear idea of what he wants to be and what he wants to do. But depending on where the moon's position is, the moon basically says, I emotionally respond or feel secure with this or that. So if the moon's position is something other than the element of the sun, he or she might be, as I said before, a Leo, a lion that does not roar, does not bark. It's not such a very fiery individual. Or depending on the other individuals, depending on the other influences. You have the influence of Mercury, how one communicates, of Venus, what one seeks in an attraction with others. What is a man looking for? What kind of a woman is this man looking for? You ask one man and he will tell you, I want a very smart woman. Another man will tell you, I want a very feminine woman. One who's very caring, giving, and not one that's working. I want her to be at home taking care of the kids. What's making the differences over here? We have perhaps the same birthday, the same element, but it could be the position of Venus, this other influence that is affecting his idea of what he wants or what he's looking for in a woman. And the same with women, what they're looking in a man. So there can be variations. Or Mars, how does one assert himself? Or Jupiter, how does one search for meaning, for truth? And Saturn, the capacity to create order or to have discipline. You may have some individuals who don't have any discipline, and some who are very disciplined. That can be affected by the various positions. I just quickly gave you an example of how an element can be modified slightly depending on what area of one's life we're talking about. His feelings and emotions, that area of the life, the mental area, one's purpose in life, how one relates to others, how one communicates and so forth. All of those can change. So you may have a person who's water, who's supposed to be sensitive, and he's not showing sensitivity. It could be that his feelings are closed up. They're shut. In other words, you can't see them, but deep down, believe me, he's still a water sign. A Leo, for example, a fire sign. If you get to know him after a while, even though he appears to be very quiet on the outside, on the surface, and you say, oh, I thought you were a fire sign. If you get to know him, you will see that most Leos like to be in the spotlight. In other words, they are Leos deep down. For example, let's take a Pisces. Pisces is a water sign. Let's say you meet a Pisces who's a very smart, industrious, hard-working businessman, and I say, I thought you were a Pisces. I am, but I don't see it. Just wait. One of these days you will see that this Pisces invited 10 orphans to his home for Shabbat, for dinner. That's typical of his compassion and his pity, of his caring. But you didn't see it, just wait. Right? So sometimes you don't see everything because it's hiding behind an outside mask. There's some other influences out there. But deep down, whatever your mazal is, that's what you are. It could be that there is other influences as well, but deep down, the individual, the mahut, the essence of the individual is still, at least 75 or 80% of his essence will still be his sun sign, the mazal that one receives as a result of being born on a particular day and hour. Okay, so let's begin with the mazalot. Let's begin with Aries. How many Aries are there here? Okay, you don't have to tell. They have a tremendous amount of courage and initiative. They are actually always looking to do something, always trying to begin new projects. They're never bored. And since they're always trying to find what to do, they don't think too much before they do something. And many times they fall flat on their face. They make mistakes. But that's the way they are. That's the way Hashem made them. They have a tremendous amount of zeal and of initiative. They also don't have too much tact. If you ever heard the word in Hebrew or in Arabic, dugri. They're very straight, untactful, complete. They'll tell you in your face what they think of you. Now, somebody here who's water and earth will not like that. Well, that's why they don't get along. Earth and water. I'm sorry, fire and earth or fire and water. But that's how these people are. They'll tell you straight to the face. They're open. They have nothing to hide. And they'll tell you what they think of you. Sometimes that's good. There's some good thing about that. They're not hiding anything. You know them for what they are. They're not hypocrites. They're quick to anger. If you ever learn Pirkei Avot, you will see in Pirkei Avot that the rabbis tell us that there are some individuals shenoach lichos v'noach leratzot. They're very quick to anger, but they are quick to appease. They calm down very quickly. Where there are others who are slow to anger. We'll talk about them next. But oy vavoy, if they get angry, for them to calm down, it will take years, if ever. They'll never forgive you. They'll never forget. So which one is worse? I'm not going to say which one is better. Which one is worse? The one that gets angry quickly but calms down quickly, or the one that's slow to anger? He gets angry once a year. But when he gets angry, oy vavoy, which one is worse? The rabbis tell us that the first one is worse. The one that's always getting angry, that's no good. Because he's always getting angry. And anger is terrible. It's a midah ra'ah, midah mushchetet. It's a terrible midah, anger. Kol ha'koes ki'ilo oved avodah zarah, the rabbis tell us. Whoever gets angry, real angry, not just that he shows displeasure, he's angry, then it's ki'ilo oved avodah, is like as though he's worshipping idols. It's a terrible midah. So if one is always getting angry every other day, that's no good. Well, but at least he calms down quickly. That's nice. They're willing to help others. They're very independent. They don't give up quickly. A quick line about the women of Aries. They like to meet a lot of people. They're very social. As a result of that, that's beautiful, but as a result of that, they sometimes ignore their old friendships. Since they're always trying to meet new people and to befriend everybody and are very social, they sometimes lose their good friends. They're not, the Aries women are not for any man. They have a tremendous amount of energy and drive, which is very good, and they're not just suitable for just anybody. Okay, quickly, what are the ma'alot and chisronot of the Aries? The ma'alot, the strengths are ambition, initiative, courage. They're very generous. They have leadership qualities. But the chisronot, that which they have to work on, is their aggressiveness, the lack of tolerance or patience, the fact that they do things without thinking about that. They're very argumentative. And last but not least, this is one of the most important things that Aries has to work on, is that they do not know how to give respect to other individuals. They're very hatzufim. They can have a tremendous amount of chutzpah. They have to learn to respect, to give proper respect to others. It's not that they're evil-minded or anything. It's just that they don't know how to properly give respect to someone else. I didn't say every Aries, but this is generally an average one. Next one, Taurus. Taurus is usually very determined, persistent, stable, cautious, patient. But oy vavoy if you make him angry. He's the one that does not forget so quickly. He's slow to anger, but once he gets angry, stay away. They're usually much more reserved. They're not as open as the Aries. So it takes a while to get to know them. And to gain their friendship, you can't become a Taurus's friend overnight. He's going to test you for a few years before he or she trusts you. Because they are very trusting. And they don't want to give their whole life to someone who they're not sure what is he or she going to do with it. They like nature, they like music. Many of them become very good musicians. They have a beautiful voice. They're very practical people. You can guide them, but you can't push them. Don't try pushing them because you're going to lose their friendship. They don't act quickly. They are very difficult to change their habits. And they're materialistic. They like good food. And they like some other things too. They're conservative. They have very, very strong feelings and emotions, but they have a problem expressing them. So just because a Taurus didn't tell you that he likes you, it doesn't mean anything. It means that they can still love you very deeply, but they don't know how to express it in words. They can put it better in writing, or they can do something to express that. So if you don't hear it from an earth sign, don't worry about it. They mean it, especially if they're still around you. Otherwise, they would have left a long time ago. They run away from, if they don't like something, they just leave it. Unless, of course, the situation is as such that they need to stay. And we'll talk about that in 2 weeks from now. What happens if things have gotten out of hand and the two are about to get divorced? The earth signs don't want to divorce usually. They try to do whatever they can to preserve a marriage. But there are situations where one has no choice. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. They're very devoted, very dedicated. They can appear sometimes cold. That's because they're slightly reserved and they don't show their feelings. As far as the women, Taurus women, what they're looking for is an eternal bond, a very strong bond with their husbands. They don't just get along and don't come close to just any man. You have to win their love. The strengths of Taurus is that they're reliable, they're trustworthy, they're stable, they're persistent, They're confident, they're cautious, they're good-natured, they're practical. Their weaknesses is that they can be extremely stubborn, one of the most stubborn signs of all. They don't just give in quickly. They can be somewhat lazy too. They're not forgiving. They'll remember something for many, many years. They can have ta'avot. Of all the 12 mazalot, they can have certain ta'avot, certain desires. They can covet certain things. And they can be very introvert. Things that they need to work on. Let's go on to Gemini. Gemini are very friendly people, very versatile, intellectual, analytical. They learn quickly, they like to learn, but they're very superficial, as I pointed out. They don't learn something in depth. Because they like to be active all the time, they can easily, of all the 12 months, become easily bored. Others don't have a problem. They'll always find something to do. If they're not active, they can easily become bored. They don't like routine. They always like change. You see how different this is from the earth signs? They like routine. They don't want change. They're very alert. They're very sharp. In the conversation, they can be very sarcastic. They make fun of you. And not everybody likes that. And then they don't really mean any evil, any bad. But that's the way they are. They can be very sarcastic and very oktsanim. You know what oktsanim in Hebrew means? They sting. They're very sharp and shrewd. But they're not aggressive. They like to settle their differences with people. They like to settle out of court. They don't pursue some. They're not stubborn to that extent. They're much more liberal. They like to learn, and they like to have a good time. Remember, this is air, but which air? Gemini. Aquarius, even though it's air, Libra, even though it's air, is not exactly the same. But there's some things that they'll share in common. All the elements share some of the things in common. Women who are Geminis like to work out of their home. In other words, they like to work. Even though they like to work out of their home, they can still be dedicated women. They can still be dedicated to their home, to their family. It will not be a contradiction. They can do the two things just fine. They're very versatile. Not everybody can handle a job and to be a good housewife. A Gemini can do both very well. What are their strengths? They're intellectual. They can be very eloquent in their speech, studious, flexible, generous, and very gentle and passive. They're not extremists. They're not fanatics. However, their weaknesses is that they can be very restless, changing, talkative, tricky. The lack of focus, perhaps. They can exaggerate. Because they're so talkative, they sometimes exaggerate and don't say the truth. So if you're buying something from a Gemini, think about it. If he's not overcharging you or something, because they know how to sell something. They're good talkers. And they're bizanim. They're very much into bizbuz. They squander money. They don't have good control of money. They just spend. That's a weakness of Gemini. Cancer. Tremendous amount of feeling and emotion. They're usually much more quieter than the other mazalot, but they're very moody. They're very, very much into moods. One day one way and the next day another mood. Of all the 12 mazalot, they are the most touchy ones. Me'od adinim, me'od nifgaim. They get insulted very quickly. They get offended. Very, very touchy, extremely so. They think people are talking about them behind their backs. These are Cancer. They are pretty much the only ones who actually think people are talking behind their backs. That's the way they are. But they have tremendous understanding for others. They can be a little bit introvert. But they're very good at maintaining their home, and they like to have a savings account. They like to save for a rainy day. Just the opposite of Gemini. They don't spend so much. They like to protect their money. They're very conscientious, and they expect others to look up to them. They need that. They are very afraid of being looked down at. And they're very much mushpaim yasrival. Of all the 12 mazalot, well, maybe the Pisces too, the water signs are tremendously at risk always of being exposed to the elements outside and actually learning and becoming and assimilating like the people's surroundings. Of all the elements, water has that problem more than the rest of them, of assimilating, of being exposed and learning from one's environment. As far as the women, they need security. That's more than anything else. Women who are Cancer want to feel secured. And they need a tremendous amount of attention from their husbands. So if you married a Cancer, you should know this, that they need a lot of attention. But they're very responsible women, extremely so. They make one of the best mothers because they're very protective of their children. The strength of Cancer is that they are tolerant, they're economical, they save money, they're very homey, very giving, they are sympathetic of others' plight, they're conscientious, and very devoted. The weaknesses is that they are very fearful. They have fears. They're super oversensitive. They can be somewhat lazy. They have a tremendous amount of imagination. In other words, daydreaming sometimes. Of all the 12 signs, they could be the ones who are the biggest kvetchers. If anybody knows what the Yiddish word for kvetcher is, that's a Cancer. Kvetcher is he's always complaining about just about everything. What can we do? That's their characteristic. They don't easily adapt to every situation, and they're very sentimental. Okay, let's go to, who's next? Leo. Leo. Very good-natured people, generous, they have leadership qualities, ambition. They are the ones who claim, at least, that they have hundreds of friends. How many friends do you have? Hundreds. Whereas if you ask a Taurus the same question, he says, I have 1.5. See the difference? They also are very quick to anger. They're very popular. They want the people should admire them. Oy vavoy if you hurt their ego. The ego is very important to them. Very important to Leo more than anybody else. The ones who are very, very bad Leos are shachsanim. They are very arrogant. They think highly of themselves. But they're very open. They'll tell you what they think about you, and they'll just criticize everybody openly, freely, without any fear. They're very happy. They're always full of life, which is something enviable. That's a very nice thing. Many of them have a very nice and magnetic personality. And they're always social. You never see a Leo who's an introvert. They're always me'uravim babriot. One of the biggest problems that Leos have is that they will actually buy things and get into debt just so they can have the latest car, the flashiest car. They're into that. Anything that makes a roshem. If a Leo is dating a girl, he's going to come in a Rolls Royce. Just to impress. Not every Leo. The Persians, maybe they'll come in a Mercedes Benz. But, or in a BMW? I forget, yeah. Yeah. But they want to make an impression. They want to make an impression. And sometimes they get into debt just to impress upon people. I'm going to splurge $100,000 wedding from my daughter. I want everybody to see it. But you don't have the money. They'll borrow, they'll go into debt just to show off. And that's a terrible midah. But that's the way they are, Leos. You'll never find an earth sign, I guaranteed, I'll sign my name to it, who will do something like that. It's suicidal for a Capricorn, for a Taurus, or Virgo to do. He would never dream of it. He thinks it's crazy. And he's right. Okay. The strength of an Aryeh, the strength of the Leo is that they're very warm, they're very charitable. Balet tzedakah, they very much believe in giving tzedakah. They can influence people, inspire people, they're not afraid. They're achnasat orchim, they're very strong, no problem. Mikasa es tu casa, no problem. The ones who are more reserved have a hard time with this. Okay, you can come over for a meal, but you can't stay to sleep. They don't trust you. Leos don't care. Come along, bring everybody, bring your friends. And they're very hopeful. They have tremendous amount of hope. If things are not looking so good, they're full of hope. So what about the women? The women like expensive clothing. If you marry a Leo, you better make a lot of money. A woman Leo, they spend a lot on dressing themselves. But they have a tremendous amount of initiative and energy, and they're hard workers. They can help their husbands a great deal. The strength of a Leo is that they're warm and generous. They're not afraid, as we said. They're machnisei orchim. Their weaknesses is that they can have ga'ava, arrogance. They can be dictatorial. They can get angry. They can be show-offs. And they like to have the last say. That could be a problem with the Leo. They're tremendous bazbezanim. They splurge, as we said. And they can be kapdanim also. Kapdanim means that they can be overly strict. And chamumei moach. They can also be very irritable and just angry about everything. Betula, Virgo, from the most modest of all the 12 signs. They're very modest and quiet, considerate, serious, hard worker, practical, very extremely organized and clean. They give their attention to every minor detail. You know, you heard the saying, they don't see the forest for the trees. That's typical of Virgo. They see every little detail. They'll remember 25 years ago what the color tablecloth you had on your dining room. You know, just details. They're very much into details. But you can depend on them. They're dependable. They want to be shlemim. They are always aspiring to be complete, to be to perfect themselves. Since they're perfectionists, they're very demanding of themselves and of others. So if you ever have a Virgo criticize you, they're doing it because they mean your benefit. They want you to be a better person. They're not the Gemini who's just criticizing for the sake of sarcasm, just to make fun. Criticism from a Virgo is meant for the benefit of the one who's being criticized. They're demanding of themselves and of others. But they can be very high-strung as a result of being a perfectionist. It takes a toll on them. You're a perfectionist, you're demanding, that means you're going to be high-strung, you're going to be nervous and tense. So you can't have the cake and eat it. In other words, you're going to have some ma'alot and some chisronot. They like to study, they know how to reason, but they worry too much. And they can be extremely frugal, penny pinching. They bought something and it just went on sale and you can get $1.50 back for it. They'll go back and give it back and buy it again just to get $1.50. What for? Why bother to go just to get $1.50 back? That's the way they are. Penny pinching, frugal. They're careful, they think twice before they do something. They don't jump. The women who are Virgos, they do a lot of things based on what the mind says. They think about it, they don't use feelings as much. And sometimes they're not tolerant. They may show a cold exterior face, but in reality they have a tremendous amount of feeling. Just on the outside it appears to be like that because they're very high-strung and they're always working and they're always doing something, so they may give the wrong impression. But they are very warm inside. The strength of a Betula is that they're considerate, they're active, hardworking, serious, modest, careful, and efficient, extremely efficient. They'll save you a lot of money if they work for you. They're very perceptive, they're prudent, and they're economical, methodical, homey, domestic, and so forth. Weaknesses of a Betula: over anxiety, too much worry, too nervous, not always happy, too critical, and sometimes timid and lack of confidence. These can be traits characteristic of a Virgo. Libra. Librans are usually very easy to get along with. They usually have a tremendous amount of tact. They're very careful with what they say. They are endowed tremendously with truth and justice. They make excellent judges, not lawyers, because lawyers are liars. But judges, hopefully, unless they're Latin American judges who accept bribes, a Libra makes a very good judge. They're very fair. That's why Jimmy Carter, who's a Libra, was always trying to make peace. You know, at least he tried. Because that's what they believe in. They believe in making peace, in settling things, and they make good arbitrators because of that. They can see both sides. They're very impartial. Librans are also very even-tempered. They can control their emotions. They think about all the pros and cons before they do something. They can be curious. They want peace, and they can be friendly. They very much like beauty. And they can, as a result of that, anything that is a little dirty or doesn't look pleasant, they stay away from it. Those, however, those who are very negative Librans, the lowest of the lowest, they can use their tact and their language to lie and to cheat. They can be very tolerant to the ashkafot, to the views of others. The women of Libra are very gentle. They're also looking for security. But the problem with the women Libra sometimes is that they tend to admire the rich and famous. And sometimes they may fall in a trap, marrying the wrong person just because he has money or he's famous. The strength of Libra is that they are considerate, they can be impartial, they're conciliatory, they're fair, looking for justice, they're a refined character, they're happy, they're forgiving, they're tactful, balanced temperament. But the weaknesses is that they're very much always contemplating, indecisive, can't make up their mind, easily influenced, and very elusive. They can also be pedantic, in other words, extremely sensitive about how they look and how the home looks, and overly strict about trivialities. And they can also be proud of themselves, because it's an element, the element of air. Scorpio is a very intense sign, very shrewd. He's always suspicious. He's closed, doesn't give up quickly. He's tenacious, I guess you pronounce it. Very decisive, very secretive, speaks openly. And some of them are very cruel. If you see somebody who's extremely cruel, good chance that he's a Scorpio. They don't give in quickly. Whatever they do intensely. They can take revenge. Of all the 12 signs, they're the most vengeful. Not vengeful, vindicative, right? They take of all the 12 signs, they don't forget a slight, and they can take revenge. They never forgive an insult. They're not afraid of problems. They're willing to fight. Because they're willing to fight, they make excellent friends in a time of war. When there's a battle and people are dying, they make good friends at time of war. They don't give up. They're fighters. But the ones who are the negative Scorpios are the ones who are always into drugs, unfortunately, because they have a weakness for certain tavot, for certain desires. The water signs, as I said before, have certain weaknesses in that area, but especially the Scorpios, they sometimes lose control over that. They're very successful in any bold enterprise. They plan and they're very calculative. The women are very responsible, very sensitive, and they need a lot of love. So of all the 12 signs, well, all women need love, but everybody does, but they especially so. If they see a husband who's not caring, they'll just let go of him. They need that very much. The strength of a Scorpio is that he has a tremendous amount of courage. He's not afraid. He's stubborn, optimistic, dedicated, patient. He's penetrating. He's dauntless. That means he's not afraid. But the weaknesses are that he can be fanatical. He can be suspicious. He can be callous, sarcastic, destructive. Some Scorpios will destroy a home, destroy a place, just because they want to get back at someone. Forget about it. Just let go. Go mind your own. No, they'll destroy the place. That's terrible. But that's the way they are. They can be very, very authoritative, very dogmatic. Sagittarius, they're very jovial, very happy, very friendly, very outspoken. They don't get discouraged quickly. They love their independence, but they don't have discipline. They love outdoor life. They like to protect others who are in trouble. They don't tolerate a lack of justice. They are always in need of people praising them and appreciating their hard work. They're tolerant. They have a tremendous sense of humor, one of the best sense of humors of all the 12 signs of Sagittarians. Very good at conversation, but they love to argue because they like to talk about just about everything. Because they make quick decisions, they make sometimes the wrong decisions. Sometimes because they want to earn a fast dollar, they gamble. Another weakness, another problem that they have. But they like life, and they recover quickly if there was ever a problem. The women, the Sagittarians, are very optimistic and very easy to get along with, but they have quite a few demands of their husbands. The strength of a Sagittarius is his sincerity, his generosity, his fairness, he's persevering, he's full of life and hope. But the weakness is that he can be very, very loud. If you hear somebody who's very loud, he could be either a Leo or a Sagittarius. You can sometimes hear them down the block. They're very loud. And they can sometimes be overconfident of themselves, and very paziz, very impulsive, very quick and aggressive, and very defiant. You tell them something, they'll go against you. They don't care. They have a problem with defying authority. They'll talk back to the cop. The policeman just told them they did something wrong. They'll talk back. That's one of the weaknesses of Sagittarius. They're also big spenders. And they're very speculative. They take risks, as I said, in the stock exchange. Capricorn, extremely responsible, quiet, serious, practical. They save money, they're ambitious, persevering, cautious, tremendous concentration, conservative, trustworthy, dependable, persistent. They don't like to ask favors from anybody. If somebody did them a favor, they try to give them back a favor as quick as possible. Their problem is that they make fun of certain people who are beneath them, or do not agree with their opinions, because they're sometimes narrow-minded. They may be even miserly, stingy towards themselves and towards others. There was one woman in London who had millions of dollars, and she ran down the street every single day collecting rags and selling soap, I think. Didn't spend, I don't know if she was a Capricorn, but that's already a disease, a sickness. They don't spend on themselves necessarily, they don't believe in spending, and they don't necessarily spend on others. The women, there's much more to this. I'm just giving you a brief description of it. They can be self-centered, reserved. Once they make a decision, you're not going to be able to change their mind so quickly. The women are somewhat introvert, but once they marry, they're extremely devoted to their husbands. They usually are a very good partner or a very good helper in the business of their husbands. The strength of the Capricorn is that they're very practical, ambitious, careful, organized, concentrated, focused. You can depend on him, but the weakness is that he can be selfish, he could be sad and depressed, stingy, authoritative, and not tolerant of other people's views. Aquarius loves humanity. He's a humanitarian. They're quiet, they're generous, they have a tremendous amount of feeling, they're always searching for the truth, they're tolerant, but they get into problems when something all of a sudden happens that it was unexpected. They are unconventional. They come up with these strange ideas all the times. They can be independent. They can be very much on their own. But even though they don't have many friends, they like friends. And once they discover a good friend, they'll be friends for life. They're very set in their ways, but you can never predict what their mood will be tomorrow. Some of them are daydreamers, but they're very giving and devoted. You can't be an Aquarian's friend so easily. It takes time to earn his friendship. Once you hurt their feelings, forget it. The women are very tolerant and trustworthy. And the strength of an Aquarius is that they love the truth. They're sincere, humanitarians. They're cooperative, social, considerate, tolerant. The weaknesses is that they can be very scattered, not always logical. They can be very gullible, radical. Fish, Dagim. Very sentimental, very sensitive, very generous, very confiding, sympathetic of others in trouble, very timid, doesn't always have self-confidence, is not always independent. They're easily influenced, but they're also inspired. They're very modest and clean, sensitive, sentimental, and moody. They sometimes don't know what they want. They have compassion. They always need encouragement. Some have a sense of humor, but they're not always practical. The women need a tremendous amount of love. They very much care for others. They love their home and their children. The strength of a dagim is the achnasat orchim. They help others. They love peace. They're very friendly and easygoing, also charitable and idealistic. The weaknesses, however, is that they can have rikshei nechitut, a lack of self-esteem. They can be daydreamers, lazy. They easily give up, too much timidity, too sensitive, and they like to show the weaknesses of others. They like to point them out. We don't have that much time, but for whatever time we have left, I just want to add a few more points. Even though these are the 12 mazalot, and each one has their strengths and weaknesses, one must remember, as I said last week, that the reason why we have those weaknesses is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given each individual a challenge, and that's his challenge. We are drawn to certain things in life, whether it is to study a particular subject, whether it is to work a particular work. In the same way that we are drawn to certain work, to a certain job, and to a certain interest, we have certain midot that are pulling us in certain directions. That's part of our job of our tikkun, is to work on those midot. And the best way to work on one's midot is to learn Torah. The Torah has the ability to give us direction. It has the ability to teach us what our priorities in life should be. And more important than anything else, ze merasen et hayetzer. It gives us the koach, the strength that we need to subdue that yetzer, that instinct, or that weakness that is maybe out of hand. Next week, B'ezrat Hashem, we'll talk a little bit more about the techniques of how to keep a marriage intact. And we'll continue from where we left off today. What one needs to know, what one can do to overcome those weaknesses. So B'ezrat Hashem, I hope to see you next week.